Imagine this. Your child hugs you tightly, whispers "I love you," and leaves to play with friends. Hours later, he's gone, without a trace. This is the haunting true story of 13-year-old Mylo Kapila, the boy who disappeared by the river, leaving behind only silence and a father's endless prayers. He was but a lad whose grin as expansive as this reaches his eyes whenever he speaks. Mylo Kapila, who was 13, was not the sort of boy who would sit in at home, endlessly swiping on his mobile. He was the sort who wanted to have the wind in his face, pedal his bike until his legs ached, and laugh so hard with his mates that it could be heard echoing across the quiet streets of Ingleby Barwick. It was an ordinary Wednesday afternoon in this peaceful town in North Yorkshire, England. The air was heavy with the promise of summer storms, but still kids played outdoors ahead of the rain at night to send them scurrying indoors. Mylo had spent his morning at school, a little restless as he waited for the last bell. The moment he did, he seized his backpack, bid farewell to his friends, and sprinted home to get dressed in his favorite navy blue hoodie, the one his dad had given him for his birthday last year. His dad, Stephen, was in the kitchen preparing a cup of tea when Mylo came dashing in, his hair damp with sweat and exuberance. "Dad, I'm off with Corey," he exclaimed, shoving on his trainers in a hurry without even loosening the laces completely. "Right, mate," Stephen replied, adding sugar to his cup of tea. Mylo shifted over and put his arms around his dad's waist in a quick hug. He pressed his cheek against his dad's side and mumbled, "Love you, Dad." Stephen ruffled his son's hair in a lazy way. "Love you too, son." And that was it. That was the last they spoke until Mylo walked out through the door, his little figure disappearing around the curve of their quiet street. Hours went by, and night fell with quiet darkness. Stephen sat at the dining table scrolling through his phone when he noticed it had taken too long. Mylo would always text or call by now, especially if he was late. A small wave of worry crept over him. He called his son's phone, but no one answered. He called again. Nobody. Trying to keep his wits about him, Stephen walked down toward the small riverside meadow near their home, a spot locals referred to as the Muddies, where children rode bicycles and played along the edge of the water. As he approached, the air was heavy and soggy. The night wind was becoming chillier, shaking the reeds and coarse grass. It was then that he saw Mylo's black mountain bike on the ground by a clump of packed mud. Next to it was his son's jacket, neatly folded as if he had removed it himself before pressing on along the path towards the river. His phone rested there too, screen cracked from a slight drop. Stephen's heart fell into his stomach. He bellowed, "Mylo, Mylo, mate, you there?" His voice trembled with a fear he had not experienced in years. The answer was only wind whistling through the bushes and the gentle lap of river water against the shore. Stephen was terrified and called 999. Within minutes, rescue boats, search dogs, and remotely piloted drones whizzed by like angry hornets in the sky. Red and blue flashing lights painted the assembly darkness, casting moving shadows upon the wet grass. The neighbors stood in awed silence, whispering prayers. Others quietly cried, imagining their own sons standing where Mylo did. A woman extended a trembling hand and placed it upon Stephen's shoulder, but he didn't see her. His eyes were fixed on the black water, which sparkled like the flashing lights, as though it would answer him with a response of where his boy had gone. As the minute passed with no Mylo in view, Stephen's knees began to water. He slumped on the damp grass, head in hands, shoulders quivering. A police officer from the area hunched in, speaking quietly into his radio, his face furrowed with worry. "It's too long," Stephen spoke with a raw voice into the stillness. "Where are you, son?" Ingleby Barwick residents and beyond soon heard the news. Rumors spread quickly on social media. A 13-year-old boy, seen playing near River Tees, vanished without trace. Comments mounted, praying for his safe return. How does a boy just vanish like that? Devastating. Hope he's returned soon. Locals placed Mylo's photograph in their shop windows. He was pictured in a football jersey, his light brown hair a little disheveled, eyes shining, and cheeks rosy with youth. The message read, "Missing, Mylo Kapila. Age 13. Last seen near the Muddies, River Tees. Anyone with information should contact Cleveland police." His school also made a statement, asking parents to talk to their children about safety along the river. His teachers remembered him as a handsome, respectful boy with a smiling face, one who would always help his peers in group work. That night, as search parties swept the river with light and dragging equipment, Stephen sat wrapped in a rescue blanket, his eyes staring straight in front of him. The Assistant Chief Constable, Richard Baker, approached him quietly. "Mr. Kapila," he spoke softly, sitting down beside him. "We're doing all we can. This is a hugely traumatic event for all parties involved, and we're not giving up." Stephen nodded, but he did not glance at him. In his mind, he replayed every moment: Mylo's smile that day, the way he had embraced him, the whispered "Love you, Dad." Why had he not instructed him to stay home that day? Why had he not gone with him to guard him as midnight's stroke went by and searchlights continued to illuminate the dark waters? Something became agonizingly clear. Mylo Kapila was no longer the boy who played at the river. He was now the face of everyone's worst nightmare, a child who vanished in an instant, leaving behind only a bike, a coat, and a cell phone. The morning sun rose the next day with no warmth. A wan, washed-out light shone over the muddy banks of the River Tees as rescue teams continued with their tireless search. Slow-moving boats crawled down the water, men in orange jackets leaning forward over the sides of the boats with long poles probing below the water. Dogs walked along the riverbank, noses down, paws sinking into damp earth. Above them, drones buzzed like agitated insects, mowing over every square inch of water from the sky. Stephen stood frozen at the edge, boots sinking into soggy ground. He'd slept not a wink last night. Every time he did close his eyes, he could see Mylo laughing, running, waving at him on the riverbank, before vanishing into dark water. He felt numb, like he was trapped in a nightmare that refused to end. The only thing keeping him upright was the thin hope that any moment now, a voice would shout, "We've found him!" and his son would be running back into his arms. But the minutes stretched into hours. The hours into days. And each day, the hope dimmed just a little more. Journalists arrived in their dozens, setting up cameras by the roadside, hushed tones into mics about the mysterious disappearance of a little boy. Locals drifted by in silence, heads bowed, some laying flowers on the riverbank. Tiny clusters of wild flowers, daisies, and fire engine red poppies spread on the muddy earth, a soft prayer for the return of Mylo. One of the women knelt among the flowers, crying as she wept tears onto the petals. "He was always such a gentleman," she said quietly to a reporter. "He would ride his bike down my street every morning and wave. Such a sweet boy." Stephen barely saw them. He sat in a folding chair that a sympathetic neighbor had carried to him, staring at the water, as if his soul had been pulled out of his chest. His brother David sat beside him, with a soothing hand on his shoulder. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say. In the afternoon, the police called for volunteers. Hundreds of the people from the nearby estates turned up, boots, gloves, and waterproofs ready, to comb the woods, the fields, and the riverbanks. In silent procession, they marched, peering at every square inch of ground for any clue, a shoe, a footprint, something. Among them was Corey, Mylo's best friend, who had been with him in the afternoon. Corey's parents walked along with him, keeping an eye on their son, whose pinched face was white. The boy had not said a word since. When questioned, he merely replied that Mylo had told him he wanted to find out how far a stone would go when thrown into the river. Corey had pedaled his bike across to the other side of the field, and when he returned, Mylo had disappeared. "I thought he went home," Corey whispered to his dad, looking around. "I thought he went home." News channels provided hour-by-hour live reporting. Prayers, hashtags, and candle face emojis clogged up social media. People across the UK watched in horror Mylo's image, that beaming, wide-eyed face, become a symbol of grief and fear. Mums and dads held their kids tighter, schools staged assemblies about river safety, and strangers relayed messages of love and hope to Stephen and his family. On the third night, Stephen lingered by the river late after the search party had gone for the day. The water moved quietly under the moon, its surface rippling with 1,000 tiny stars. He remembered when he showed Mylo how to swim. Mylo was 5, his small arms thrashing wildly as he clung to the shoulders of his father. "Don't let go, Dad," he had cried, fear and excitement mixing in his little voice. "I'll never let go, mate," Stephen had promised, holding him tight in the cool water. That promise echoed in his chest now, a painful reminder of a father's helplessness. Tears streamed down his cheeks, dripping onto his clasped hands. "Please," he whispered to the dark water. "Please bring my boy back to me." On the fourth day, the rescue team announced that due to strong currents and dangerous conditions, they had to pause diving operations temporarily. Stephen felt the words pierce through him like cold steel. It felt like giving up. But the assistant chief constable assured him the search would continue with surface scans and drone footage. "We're not stopping, Mr. Coppola," he said firmly. "We will find your son." But with each day that went by, the reality pressed harder on Stephen's shoulders. Family members and friends came bearing food he could not eat. They hushed their voices when they spoke before him, as if he were delicate glass. The house was empty without Mylo's loud laughter ringing in its corridors, his sneakers dropped by the door, his backpack flung over the couch. Every room became a shrine of memory now, every corner echoing his son's absence. On the sixth day, Stephen was again at the river bank, watching divers plunge into the water in their black attire, masked faces hidden from view. The sun beat high above, a merciless contrast to the grief that attached itself to each of them. Children laughed and played in the distance, high-pitched voices ringing with mirth, none of them aware of the tragedy taking place just a few meters away. As the divers moved slowly through the black water, Stephen closed his eyes. He recalled Mylo's birth, the tiny cry that broke the silence of the hospital room, the way his minute fist curled over his finger, so small and lovely. He remembered his first day at nursery, the sobs in his big brown eyes as he said goodbye, and the huge grin when Stephen picked him up later, clutching high above his head a crayon-drawn masterpiece. He recalled birthday cake splattered on Mylo's cheeks, rides on his bike in the park, movie nights cuddled on the couch. He recalled every single "I love you, Dads," every hug, every sleepy kiss on the cheek before bed. And he recalled that last hug, Mylo's arms tightening around him, his cheek pressed against his side, and that little whisper, "Love you, Dad." Hours later, as the sun went down again and the divers returned to the shore, their heads shaking in unison, Stephen experienced a part of himself break. A quiet, profound shattering that left him hollow and trembling. He slowly moved away from the water and towards his house, his footsteps becoming increasingly leaden. He spent the night in Mylo's room. The bed was neatly made, the blue bedspread scattered with small footballs. His school books were stacked on his desk, and his favorite football boots were propped against the window, still covered in dried mud from last week's match. Stephen sat at the edge of the bed, lifting the boots and holding them close to his body. "I'm sorry, mate," he panted into the empty air. "I should have been there. I should have kept you safe." The wind in the garden rustled through the trees, accompanied by the faraway rumble of automobiles and the yelping of dogs. But inside the room, no more than silence. On the 7th evening, the town organized a candlelight vigil along the river bank. Several hundreds of people attended, holding candles that flickered in the face of the evening wind, their faces illuminated with tears. Children stood holding photographs of Mylo, some openly crying against their mother's shoulders. A local priest recited a prayer, asking for courage to Stephen and his family, and for Mylo to be located and returned home. As the candles lit up the dark river bank, Stephen stood amidst them, tears pouring freely from his eyes. He felt hands grasping his shoulders, heard soothing words of sympathy, but none of these could reach through to the hollowness of the pain in his heart. Looking out towards the river, shining in the light of the candles, he whispered softly, "Wherever you are, Mylo, know that I love you. I will always love you." The river went on flowing, dark and unresponsive, taking with it the fluttering shadow of the candles. Over them, the stars shone softly in the dark sky, far and beyond reach. And so the search continued. The hope burned like a dying candle, but it could not be fully put out. For deep within, where love and grief blur together, Stephen still held on to the hope that one day, somehow, his son would come storming back to his arms, his smile lighting up the world once again.